All right. So I'm going into part two. Just to summarize, like what we went over last week. We were talking mainly about what the Catholic view of Mary is, how that differs substantially from the Bible, part of where it came from. And this time we're going to talk a little bit more about the Catholic view of salvation. Does anyone know anything already about how theirs might differ from us? Any thoughts on like what they think or how it could be different? Yeah. No, it's actually probably the furthest from once saved, always saved that you could actually get, and we'll go into that. It's as far away from that as you can get to a point where it is almost kind of crazy, like how much you can lose your salvation and what can cause you to lose it and how you have to regain it. And we'll go a little bit into that now then. So it starts with faith, and Catholics would also say, yeah, we believe in faith, and we're saved by faith the same way that we would. But I would put a kind of to that, because it's faith, but they will very often emphasize, but also works. It's like faith and your works are what saves you. It's not just your faith. They believe in original sin. Does anyone know what original sin is? What? Yeah. It's the idea that you're born with sin, and there's some disagreements between Christians on like how that manifests, like the sin from the garden. Like some people will believe that it is like you have a sin nature to you, that you are like inclined towards sin because of what happened in the garden. But what the Catholics, their view is that you actually have like the mark of sin, as in you have sinned by the time that you're born. Like you have 100% committed a sin by the act of being born, and that's your original sin. They believe that that is cleansed through baptism. So as in you get rid of that original sin by being baptized. That's why they emphasize the baptism of infants so much. And that this would be necessary for salvation. And this was an interesting one when I was exploring this, like the idea of like you must be baptized in order to be saved, which they believe. But are there some examples that you can think of like very quickly about like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Where someone isn't baptized, but it could be saved? Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
The thief on the cross.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's the go-to. Is like that's the most clear from Scripture, is that he very clearly wasn't. And the interesting way that they try to get around that while still holding to you must be baptized in order to be saved, is they believe that there's actually other kinds of baptism besides just like what we think of as like immersion in water. So they believe in like there's a baptism by blood. And so like if you, let's say like you never get baptized, but like you die for the faith, or if you're like a baby and you get killed, that can count as like a baptism by blood, where you're not actually really baptized, but it counts as a baptism. Or there's a baptism of desire. So this was one that I brought up when I was talking to a Catholic. Okay, so you're saying that you need to be saved. Well, like what if I was like all for the Catholic Church, I was just about, because they won't baptize you for up to sometimes over a year after, if you like come there as an adult and like you're not baptized, they'll make you go through an entire process of learning everything before they'll baptize you, which is interesting because they'll baptize an infant, but they want you to be confirmed, know everything. They want to like basically test you before they'll let you convert and baptize in. But in that scenario where this person is on their way, let's say like they're literally on their way to their baptism and they get like hit by an 18-wheeler and they die. Well, they would say that because that person wanted to be baptized, that counts as a baptism too. So you have what's called a baptism of desire. Like, so they have all these ways to kind of get around like the very obvious, like what about this or what about that, and still try to call it baptism, even though it's very clearly not a baptism. Like a baptism means the immersion in water. It's not all of these other things that they are speaking about. They have an idea of also as well of the age of accountability. So I don't think that that's necessarily the worst thing. There's a lot of Christians who do think of the age of accountability, but they have this idea that by the time that you are 7, that's when your sin actually applies to you. So every time before then, you're not actually capable of sinning because you don't have reason. Once you hit 7, now you're fair game. Now, if anything that goes at that time. And then they also have the idea of venial sins and mortal sins. Has anyone heard those terms before? Yeah? Do you know what they mean?
I think a venial sin is something smaller that you can be forgiven of, whereas a mortal sin is almost like you can't be forgiven. I'm not positive.
Yeah, I mean that's more or less what it is. So like a mortal sin you can't be forgiven of except by a priest or what they would call like perfect contrition, which means like if you are perfectly able to, how we would say like repent, then you can be forgiven. But they say that you can't really know very well if you can actually repent yourself or like if you were actually forgiven by God. And so the safe bet is to go to a priest. So the priest is able to absolve you of it. But at the same time, like even though they absolve you of it and they'll tell you to do what's called penance, that's where it's like, say 7 Hail Marys or do this or give to the poor. They'll tell you to do something after in order to get more forgiveness out of it that you then have to do. But even then, you're not actually totally forgiven because you've now incurred purgatory debt. So like you've essentially, by doing this mortal sin, you've added some length of time to where you're going to essentially be tortured one step below hell or above hell for a certain given amount of time until your sins are totally purged from you and you're totally clean. So that is how they view the forgiveness of sins. Just to be clear, you pretty much have to be forgiven by a priest. It has to be a priest. After that, you have to do a penance. So you have to do something in order to then clean yourself. And after that, you still have some kind of debt to you because of the sin that you did. Now you're back to being saved because if you commit a mortal sin, you're unsaved now. You've now fallen out and you're no longer, if you were to die then, you're done. You're straight to hell, basically, is how it goes. Any questions on any of that? 7 years old? It's kind of just I don't know if there's like 100% set reason why it's 7, but the idea is that like there's a certain age where you start to be able to reason more and have more accountability of what you're able to do. And I think they kind of just picked 7. There might be some biblical or like ancient justification for 7 that they might point to, like maybe like, because I know like 7 was actually an age that was used a lot. Like that was when like, if you were trying to be a knight, that's when you'd very first start off as a page, would be at the age of 7. That's the first time that you get apprenticed out. So it could have some like very old origins to it because 7 was a common age for things like that. Or like that's when you'd start working with the blacksmith or other things like that. Generally like that was around the age that you could start working and learning a trade or a job or whatever you were going to do. So that could be it. But again, I'm just spitting random history knowledge that somehow connected on that. So I could be totally wrong too. Any other questions on it? All right. Oh, no.
My understanding with Catholicism is that they keep a barrier between you and Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why you go to the priest.
Yeah. So
because you can't go directly to God yourself.
yeah. So they say that they will say, like, if you ask them, like, can you pray to God? Like, most Catholics will tell you, like, yes, you can. Even ones that are, like, very knowledgeable. But they'll say that it's better to go to the priest. It's better to go pray to a saint instead because they have a closer connection to God than you do. So that's kind of how they'll, like, get around it. And the reason why they think that is they think that, like how we talk about, like, laying on hands. They believe that every priest that they've had has had a line of laying hands on since the time of the apostles. And it's been this perfect unbroken chain. And that laying on hands gives the priest the ability, like 2 abilities to perform miracles just on demand, like can just do miracles by the status that they've been given, which is they can transform the bread and the wine into the body and the blood of Jesus Christ, the literal body and blood of Jesus Christ. They can do that on demand based off of the fact that they had hands laid on them. And they also believe that you can, that they are able to forgive sins because of that. So they believe that like they have now been given the power to absolve people of their sins for them. Like that's been handed down.
Is that what the last rites are?
Yeah. So the last rites are essentially like they go through, like they give you the body and the blood, which they believe like is literally Jesus Christ. And it gets to the point where like they actually won't drink wine or like grape juice or anything like that when they do communion. Almost always, like the normal people don't. The priest drinks it by himself, and everyone else gets a wafer. And the reason why they do that is because they believe that like even like an atom of that like bread is 100% Jesus and is actually literally Jesus that is there. And so if you were to even take just a little bit of that, like you get that's full, you're good. And but if you were to drop any of it, like if you spilled a drop of wine, that's a drop of Jesus that is now in the carpet forever, like desecrating it. And if you walk across that, you're walking on top of Jesus and you're now disrespecting Jesus. And they'll actually, it goes to the point where they will have the communion sitting in front of an altar and you will go and you will pray before that because it's like Jesus is there with you because he's in that bread that's in there. That is the extent that it goes with how they see communion.
So when somebody's on their deathbed in the hospital,
They'll get that, and they'll get forgiveness for their sins. So that's the last rites. Yeah. So they'll try to give them both, and they'll have a priest come and absolve them. And generally they try. That's like how I was saying. Like, if you commit a mortal sin and you die like that, doesn't matter what happened before that. One time of doing that, you're done. And so they try to get last rites to make sure that everything's cleared, like you're good to go. Because like mortal sins are things often like what we think of, like right, like where it's like murder and other things, like really bad stuff. But also missing church is a mortal sin for them. Yes, if you miss church. That is considered a mortal sin. You can look this up if you don't believe me, but like I found that it was considered a mortal sin if you'd have no good reason for it. So I know a lot of Catholics that do not go to church very often, and they really don't have a lot of good reasons. And if they really do believe it, they should really reconsider that because that is a lot of debt that they're accruing up of torture for eternity if they don't get that at least forgiven. Oh. So there's a few verses that are used to justify Catholic beliefs on this. Matt, could you read James 2:24 for me?
You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only.
Okay. So, I mean, if you take it in just that, it sounds a lot like what they're saying, where it's like, oh, you absolutely have to do stuff. It's not just works, it's faith too. Or it's both of those. In 1 John 5:16 through 17.
If any man see his brother sin a sin which is not unto death, he shall ask, and he shall give him life for them. That sin is not unto death. There is a sin unto death, I do not say that he shall pray for it. All unrighteousness is sin, and there is a sin not unto death.
Yeah. So this one is how they justify like that split between what's a mortal sin and what's a venial sin. But you'll also notice that like nothing in that verse is actually saying like, here's the list of everything that is like a sin unto death, and here's the list that's all the stuff that's not. We're kind of given a much blurrier look at what that actually means and what a sin unto death is versus like what isn't. And I think there's a reason for that we're not. But Catholics generally they like to define absolutely everything in the most like clear terms possible, even with stuff that is like deliberately left unclear in Scripture. Almost everything has like this, it's almost like a formula when you look at like how salvation works and what you have to do and at every little step. Any questions on any of those verses? Okay. So we'll look at like, here is just the most basic way of like, you could see like how they see salvation. So when you're born, you're baptized about 3 days after that. You need to be baptized. Once you're 7, your sin now applies. So now you're actually like, once you hit the age of reason, now you have to worry about that. Age 13, they have you go through what's called a confirmation, and they require you to do that before they'll let you take what they call it the Eucharist, we would call it communion. You have to go through this confirmation where you read this massive book of all these different things. Most people that I've met don't remember anything that's in it. But it's just this big list of here's absolutely everything the Catholic Church believes on everything. And it covers everything from like, here's what we think about Muslims, here's what we think about the death penalty, here's what we think about marriage, here's what we think about this. Like it's an incredibly huge, exhaustive list of like, here's every last thing of what we believe and why. You have to attend Mass every Sunday or it's a mortal sin. And with their Mass, the most important thing with it is that communion, taking that. That is like the central part of it, and that's what they think is the most important. And they believe that once you take that, you're actually filled with grace for a 7-day period and until the next time that you need to take it. So you must confess all your sins to a priest and have penance. That's where you actually, say Hail Marys, do other things like that. And then you get your last rites before you die. Any questions on anything with any of these things and how they work or what they mean by them? Yeah, what's up?
What do the last rites entail?
Yeah, so the last rites entail you generally, if you're like are a Catholic and you have a priest come out to do your last rites, they'll take your like final confession. Here's all the sins that I did, and then they'll give you communion, and then you die. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's the last minute like deathbed. Let's make sure we got everything cleared out here. That's essentially how it goes. And you have a lot of just like interesting changes. Like if you did convert to the Catholic Church at an older age, you would have to go through confirmation before you get to be baptized. So they'll baptize an infant. But if you're an adult coming to them, they want to make sure that you know absolutely everything about all their beliefs. They want to test you. They want to make sure that you have all of this. And so you have these two very different kinds of baptism when you have it that way, where you have infants and also you have to be really educated and know exactly what you're doing before we will baptize you. Uh-huh.
I feel like having this formula
Yeah.
kind of lends itself to the unfaithful Catholics, like the people that, because, what am I trying to say? The Christmas and Easter Catholics,
Yeah.
that they know that there's a few steps that they got to do, and it's like, as long as I do those steps, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like I can show up Christmas, Easter, and then I'll get my confession in, I'll do this, and now I'm good for the rest of it.
That's contributing to
Yeah.
it, is because you have a formula.
And so you can kind of,
Nothing in your heart.
yeah.
It's your formula.
And then you just know that as long as I don't like instantly die and I get to be on my deathbed, I can get my last bit in and then I'm good. And I can just do whatever I want in between then. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that that's definitely true. Like, once you, like, make it this kind of, like, formulaic thing where it's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure for your life on what you got to pick in order to make it to heaven, it's, yeah.
In Malta, I don't know how they get there, and I don't know if it's a common Catholic practice, but you can actually pay money
Mm-hmm.
to get your relatives out of purgatory earlier, or if you give your entire inheritance over to the church,
Mm-hmm.
that'll guarantee you immediate salvation.
Really?
Have you heard anything like
Yeah,
that?
yep. So the immediate salvation, that's an interesting one. That is, so all of that would be considered indulgences. And so that's what like the initial split of the Protestant Reformation was over that, where it was like, you give me a bunch of money and we're going to reduce your purgatory sentence. And the way that works is the Pope controls something that's called the treasury of merit. And what this is, it's not like a real thing. It's this imaginary thing where every time you have a saint that dies, the scales are so tipped forward on the grace side when he dies versus the sin, that all of that grace that's excess goes into a bank that the Pope controls. And then he can then use that. So when you're like tipped on the other side, and this is your sin, and this is your grace, and your sin is outweighing it, he is able to put out grace that is excess from those saints and bring it back to even to reduce your purgatory time. So normally, like, you have to go through 1,000 years of torture to even them out. But now he can reduce it so with the extra grace, and now it's only like a week or two of torture, and then you're good. That is like 100%. This is how it is laid out in the actual like teaching, where you have this excess that comes in, and the Pope, he has these methods that he uses to give them out, and so that's one of them where it's like, yes, 100%, you can pay to get a priest to do like a mass for you, and that's going to reduce your purgatory time, or you pay money, or you do other things. But they've tried to get away from it because it looked really, really bad for them, and they did actually reduce it a lot because it was horrible at the time of Luther, and they actually recognized like just how bad it was. But now it's more like there's things like if you go to a certain church at a certain time and you go through the doors of it, that'll reduce your purgatory time. Or if you go climb a mountain, a specific mountain, that'll reduce your purgatory time. Like there's all these like random acts that you can do where you don't necessarily have to pay money, but that might also be like a Malta thing, because like the Catholic Church is different depending on what country it is, and so the Maltese were probably just very greedy.
Well, maybe I misunderstood that, but for sure you'd be able to go to heaven. Maybe it was.
Yeah. No, that is a thing, but it's a little more complicated, if that makes sense. Like it's kind of like you have to still be going to church and be a Catholic and do all these other things, but it's going to like buy off your time. So if you make yeah.
Well, it's a known thing in Malta, though, that if you're dying, the priest will come in and they'll say, if you'll sign everything over to the church, then that will also get you into heaven.
Yeah. So that'll.
Sign all your possessions over to the church.
Yeah.
And they would do it when they would eliminate the family, get them out,
Mm-hmm.
and they would get them just on their deathbed.
Yeah, so all of that is like that, where I was talking about like your grace versus your sin, that would be considered a very gracious act. And so, yes, that would like alleviate that time. But it would only work for like someone who's actually a Catholic and like has been baptized and done all these things. And that, a priest could also just last rites bring you in through that.
Well, that's if they're working with integrity within their religion.
Yeah, no, so yeah, that would work within it. But
For them, I think they just get however they can get.
yeah, they could also just be corrupt. that is a possibility. But under their like how their own rules are supposed to work, you can do that, and that would be considered an act of grace that then reduces your purgatory time. Yeah. But yeah, if you make mistakes, you could go to hell. I mean, that's normal enough. But yeah, more than likely you're going to spend time in purgatory. And purgatory is described as like literally like one step above hell itself in terms of like what you're experiencing. Yes?
Is it like also if you, as a child born with a sin, and if you're not baptized and you die, you go directly to purgatory?
No, actually, they have a whole other place that they go to. They go to limbo. And limbo is its own thing.
I know in Lutheran
Yeah.
religion, that's what it's kind of
Yeah.
described.
Yeah, they believe in limbo. So there's another, so you have heaven, you have hell, you have purgatory, and then you have limbo that's kind of in between these. And the idea of limbo is like, that's where if you were like really, really, really good person, but you died before ever hearing about Christ, you can go to limbo, possibly. Or if you were like, again, like an unbaptized baby and you die before you hit age 7, you go to limbo. It's kind of hard to get where they came from, but there's like a verse in Revelation that talks about, and the dead come out of the sea. and like all the dead of the sea came out, all the dead of Hades, and it talks about that in the final judgment, and that's the closest that they come from, and they call it like the sea. Like it could also be called like the sea of lost souls. It's also like the idea was like if you died on a boat, you could end up in limbo. Like if you died in the ocean and you didn't actually get buried, that used to be an idea. That's kind of like gone away now. But historically, it used to be like if you died on the ocean, like sorry, it doesn't matter how good or bad you were, you just end up there, and you're stuck there until the final judgment to get sorted out. So it's sort of like you died in like a weird category and God can't get to you yet. Yeah, what's up?
So you're saying that basically, if you're a Catholic, you can be baptized and go through your confirmation, go like attend masses. You can have your last like rites read to you, or however they do it, and still be in purgatory.
Oh yeah, no, you're almost certainly going to be in purgatory.
So
Yeah.
there's almost like no way, unless you do like the drastic and just sign over everything. There's almost no way to actually.
So again, you don't like that might Malta and their church might be like that, but for the most part, they're not going to. Most Catholic priests in most places are not generally going to tell you you need to sign over absolutely everything in order to buy your way in. Again, like they're a lot more like if you went on a pilgrimage to a specific church and you saw like these bones of these saints, then you can buy out your purgatory time. Like there's a lot of other ways, I guess, that you could do it.
Also that you can pray for your relatives.
Yeah. So praying for your relatives that are there, and you can also pay them to do that. And
Like candles and stuff.
yeah. So that's called like a mass for the dead, and so they'll have a priest. You can pay them. I think like the minimum is like $5, but then you can give like as much as you want, and it's encouraged to give more. And then they'll do a mass for the dead, and then that reduces their purgatory time. And you can get like 20 or 30 of them, and then that should reduce it completely. But I can't remember exactly how much time, or if there's like a set like every mass equals 100 years off your purgatory sentence or anything. But either way, you have a purgatory sentence. All right. So what does actual salvation look like after all of that? Could you read that for me, Sean?
For by grace you have been saved, by faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast.
Now, I could go through and I could pull out about 20 verses that more or less say this in different terms, where it's like it is by faith, through grace, and over and over and over again. And what is often pointed to is this one verse in James. It's the only one that says not by faith, but by works. Now, how do those two work together? So we know that like it's not like I'm going to use these verses to beat these other verses. Like that verse is wrong because these ones. No, they work. Everything in the Bible works together. Nothing is like just like this is a wrong verse. You're going to go down a really bad path if you start working like that. So how do these two work together? How do you get faith is not by, it's not faith alone, but faith and works. And how do you get it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast? How do those two work together? Okay. Yeah.
Maybe works are a result of your faith. It's just the proof of your faith. That's
Yep.
what it's talking about.
No, exactly. It's when it's talking about like this, what it means by what it's talking about with faith, because words can have multiple meanings to them. The faith that is talked about in James is talking about that idea of like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but I never do anything. It's just that profession of it, but all you have is a profession to show for it that your faith exists. Every other time it's talking about like actual lived faith, if that makes sense. So it's saying that you are saved by your faith. It's not by your works. Your works are your evidence that you have faith. It's not actually what is like saving you, but it's what is justifying you. It's what's showing you as like this is how I can show you like I am a Christian, that I have a living faith. What?
People rather than to God.
Sorry?
Does that make sense?
What?
Abraham believed and it was counted to him for righteousness. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. I don't know. I'm thinking like maybe the justification by works is
Yeah.
a
It's the
testimony.
yeah, pretty much. And then you have like Abraham's brought up in the faith chapter as like the greatest faith as well, and like that he's saved by faith. So they work together, but it's understood that like your works are just not what is actually. You're not buying off purgatory time or doing anything like that, or buying your grace points that go into the treasury by doing good things. Oh, did you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of like my understanding, because I've pondered that a lot too with all the questions over time. You know, grace and faith have to come first, and works come after, because grace cannot be earned. Grace is given, and it's given by God, and we believe by the faith that God has given it to us. And once we have that revelation or realization, like the individual goes, this is something I could not have done on myself, and God has done it for me, then the result, the action after that is a life lived in service to God. We want to please God because we have a relationship, because we know God and Jesus has forgiven us when he didn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And that is receiving the grace and receiving the gift of God. And because of that, we want to serve. And so by our life of service, those are our works. And in the context of James has examples before and after. He's giving people as individuals, saying they did what they did because of what God did for them. And that is, like what Selena, I think, was where she was going, is other people can see us, because they'll ask us, why are you doing this thing? Why are you building this church? Why are you knocking on my door? Why are you bothering me on a Saturday or giving me a flyer? That is a work, is it not? And we're doing it because I want to see you know Jesus like I do.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the heart. It comes from a relationship connection with God, who has given us the grace, because we tell them, God has forgiven me of my sins. And they look at us cross-eyed and funny, and they go, well, why didn't you just go to church? Well, church, Catholics, whatever, can't do that for us. Only God can do that. We have that revelation, and so we have that change on the inside, which makes itself evident on the outside.
No. Yeah.
So what have you found to be one of the best approaches to a Catholic, not a Catholic that's just never goes to church, but one that kind of does go to church and trust in his church? What is your approach?
I don't know. It's really hard to talk to people when they're really invested in the Catholic Church, because.
Not that deep, I understand.
Oh, okay. Like just someone who goes a bit.
That lightly goes, probably 4 times a year.
Generally, I think the best approach is not necessarily to argue with them about all these. You can like have a discussion about some of them and have them like just bring up like, oh, well, what about this? Well, what about that? What do you think of these things? Not just try to beat them over the head with it. But I think the best one is like, well, I get that you like want to serve God and you want to have all these things, but just kind of like look at the people around you. Are they good examples of that? Like, are the people that are around you, does this look like a lived faith that you're experiencing? Like, don't you think that you could maybe have more if you, like, that this is not necessarily giving you the fullness of God? Like, they claim all of these things, but, like, the actual, like, observed, like, what you can see in front of you out of, like, what is going on in that congregation, what is going on with the people that also call themselves Catholics, and just how little of a lived faith they often have, that is probably the best you can do. And having a lived faith yourself and being able to express that and show that and be that example where they can look at you and see, okay, this person is very different than the normal people that I associate with who call themselves a Christian or a Catholic. And there's something about this person that I would rather have than whatever is going on in mine. That is going to sway way more people than than any like high-minded argument about like, oh, well, let's talk about like what happened in 300 AD at this council, or like let's talk about these Bible verses in relation to this, or let's talk about like how Vatican II is contradictory to the Council of Florence, even though you call both of these infallible councils. Like, you're going to get way more with that than you could with any of those things. Even though yeah.
My approach has always just been, it's the simplicity of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
You don't try and argue with the religious people. Like when Paul's talking to Corinthians, like, you got Jews and Greeks, you got the super religious, and then you got the super, master's degrees, doctorates,
Yeah.
everything type of people. It's the simplicity of the gospel that's going to win either one of them.
Yeah.
In that moment, like say on an outreach on the streets. Now, if you're working with somebody at work, it's your testimony that's going to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I mean is like, is that just like observable example where it kind of breaks through all of these high-minded arguments of like, well, it doesn't really matter about all these things I'm saying because there's no actual like evidence that it's real. I wanted to go through just a couple more things. So that is John Paul II, and he's kissing a copy of the Quran as he hands that over. There's a lot of changes that have occurred with the Catholic Church since their latest council. Vatican II, they decided that they're not going to do Latin anymore, and they've moved towards identifying Muslims as worshiping the same God as they do. So they've now come together and they've said, we all worship the same God, we all have the same one, we have the same religion, essentially. They believe that there's differences, but they believe that they're the same God. And that's him kissing the Quran as he gets it from them. That's not the latest pope, that is a pope from a few decades ago. Yeah?
Recently I have seen the changes in Catholics about homosexuality also. They have openly
They haven't quite openly accepted it, but they're moving towards that. What they've said is that priests can choose to bless a same-sex relationship, but they can't marry them in church yet. But every time they're incrementally moving towards it, so like I had that in here, like in this year, Jubilee, there's like a special LGBT Catholic pilgrimage that you can go on. Yeah, just a little. And I think what I would say is happening is that the current pope is paving the way for the next pope to come in and institute a complete change there. There's also something that they're creating called the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi, which is a Catholic church, a Jewish synagogue, and a Muslim, I'm blanking on the word for a mosque. So it's all three of these in one center, and it's all together, and it's the reason why it's being created, it's for like fraternity and brotherhood, and it's like nothing about like the wording on it is even anything close to like godly. It's all about like how we need to all have this like same relationship with each other, and they're creating this all as a group together. You have recently there was an archbishop who got excommunicated, who was like vocally against some of the things that have been going on with the Pope, and he was like hardcore conservative in the Catholic side. Like he thought like you should only have like Mass in Latin and other things like that. He's out. They removed him. But there's other people like they have a guy called like Friar Martin who's paving the way for like the LGBT stuff. Like he openly wears like pride vestments and all these things. They allow this push to occur, but like the more conservative side, they're like slowly like weeding them out in the current developments. And recently also, I thought this was really cool. I should have had the video, but the current Pope said that Martin Luther was right, which was really interesting. He said Martin Luther was right about it being about faith, and he said like we were totally wrong about that in the 1500s. So that was a really interesting move. He's moved towards like trying to like be nicer to Protestants, but also nicer to atheists and nicer to Muslims and nicer to literally everybody. But he's been making like concessions to all of it. Like there's even like a video you can see where he's participating in like a Native American like ritual ceremony where he's got like a headdress on as a way to like say sorry about like something that happened in Canada. But yeah, there's a lot of bizarre stuff that's going on. But either way, it's moving towards this more universalist faith and a much more liberal faith than what it has been for a very long time. So I just wanted to give those recent changes. Are there any other questions with anything? All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. So you can go next door, get your donut, anything. If anyone has any questions on anything afterwards, I love to talk about this. I could talk about this stuff forever. So just feel free to talk to me, ask me about it. And yeah, enjoy the break.